The 1990 season of Formula One presented a smorgasbord of cars with diverse technology. It was a year Formula One teams had developments and personnel that shaped the next 30 years of the sport. Complaints about all the cars looking the same could be made here with a grid of unique cars. The diverse set of cars represents some fundamentally different concepts in race car development. Each of the cars shown here has a unique concept that has an aerodynamic effect, and these will be analysed in a series of videos using CFD. Starting with the Leyton House CG901, which this video analyses, carried a delayed diffuser development that was added for the French Grand Prix, almost netting a win. The Tyrrell 019 pioneered a raised nose that was in turn adopted by the entire grid. The Ferrari had a semi-automatic gearbox that narrowed the chassis, reducing the car's frontal area. The McLaren MP45B continued the development of the MP44 chassis, with a naturally aspirated engine and significant aerodynamic developments. The Williams FW13B likely produced the most downforce, winning in Hungary, typically a circuit that rewards such a car. Finally, Benetton B190, a team on the rise with 2 wins late that season. This analysis will focus on the Leyton House CG901. Context will be drawn from the March 881 analysed in that previous video. However, there was a convergence problem in that video that meant the rear wing and body results were not accurate and will be redressed in this video. Starting this analysis, the same chassis, front and rear wing are used because the cars were so similar. The biggest difference lies with the diffuser, which is the point of this analysis. Adrian Newey and the team were struggling to apply expected performance indicated by the wind tunnel. The problem ended up being resolved with a different diffuser. In these analyses, the diffuser is measured with the body. The only other large difference between the 881 and the 891 or 901 is the length of the nose. A longer nose for the 901 would consequently reduce the drag, but conceptually it isn't different. With the front wing end plates extending to the centre of the wheels, the vortices shed do not impact the rest of the car, unlike the MP44. So keeping everything the same means all the differences can be attributed to the diffuser. Basically, any developments that Newey added for the March 881 for the Leyton House 891 were a total failure. They were the last team using the aging Southampton University wind tunnel with a wooden structure for the rolling road that had warped, meaning the diffuser wasn't stalling when it should. This meant that the aggressively large diffuser volume or area ratio did not correlate to on-track performance. In reality, the air was separating at a particular ride height, resulting in a major loss of downforce. It was characterized by the drivers as unpredictable, meaning that the drivers had no idea how much grip was available to them, particularly in high-speed corners. It took running the models at a different wind tunnel to discover this issue. By that time, the 1980 season had come and gone. For 1990, the team was going through internal struggles for the control over management and the design team led by Newey. And then when the aerodynamic upgrade was ready and on the car, Newey was gone. The first race this car saw was round 6 for the French Grand Prix, which it almost won. But this was the only real success that year. Reliability was also an issue. Capelli retired from third in the following British Grand Prix. What is the change in the diffuser we'll be looking at? Firstly, the 901. As was common, the Coke bottle tapered rear end. All the bodywork is removed between the rear wheels and gearbox, exposing the upper surface of the diffuser to airflow. This is apparent on both cars, but looking from behind you can really sense the volume of the 881. Looking now at the 901, the diffuser volume is divided by strakes rather than a large centre section. Taking a drawing view of the diffuser exit for the 881 shows how significantly large it is, and the extent the 901 concept has shifted. The outer sections for the 881 actually draw air from above the floor and rotate in a vortex following that shape. For the centre section, it pulls air from underneath the floor, obviously. It does this with a number of mechanisms, with the slope given the area ratio and vortex structures being 2. There is an excellent article by Willem Toert on his LinkedIn page about diffusers that I recommend for a decent read that explains this in some detail. In the updated version, the ratio of area at the end of the floor to the diffuser exit becomes difficult when this becomes 6. Clearly, the 901 diffuser exit is much smaller than the 881. The 881 is about 50% larger. Considering the 890 was more aggressive than this, it seems that this was pushing the basic principle and was a large contributing factor for the lack of performance. Before we look at the flow patterns and structure, I'll talk about the numbers. Firstly, the convergence problem. The 881's force plot for the X direction for the drag and the Z direction for the lift. Before I stopped the simulations after 800 iterations, which was enough before. However, for the 881 it wasn't, and these plots show the numbers were still changing, slowly, but changing. Considering this is fundamental to CFD analysis, this is a really bad mistake. I thought about deleting the video because it was pretty bad, but the details on the front wing still stand, and therefore I haven't. I'm sure you can go through any video and find at least one mistake and probably more. Without digging too far into what convergence means, simply it reflects the stability of the solution. With the marginal performance of the 881's diffuser, it was unexpectedly taking longer to solve, going by the previous simulations. There are also other factors that contribute to convergent problems, which mostly have something to do with meshing, but the iterations is mostly the problem here. An application of adaptive meshing would be suitable here, maybe for another time. Now the cases are converging, I ran them at different airspeeds to see how the coefficients change. I had discussions with people that wanted to see the coefficients. I thought the forces were more relatable, also you can just calculate them with the information presented. Making the coefficients explicit will make them easier to read, particularly over changing airspeeds. The only thing I haven't done is normalize the data, which should happen, maybe one day. The airspeed of 35 to 50 meters per second will run in the cases apart from the 881 at 40 meters per second because interpolation. From the force plots on the left, both cars have similar results. The 901 has only 50 newtons more downforce at 45 meters per second with exactly the same drag. The actual 901 has a longer nose than this model, so it's likely to be less draggy. One note, at 50 meters per second there seems to be breakdown in numbers, and more so for the 901. This is the point where I wish I had more storage on my computer and normalized the results just like the actual aerodynamicist, probably an aeronautical engineer, actually said I should do. It would make the missing downforce more apparent with the increased airspeed and the changing Reynolds number. With the drag being exactly the same, it was produced in a very different way. This is apparent in the sum of the aerodynamic components, which is significantly higher for the 881. The missing drag from the 901 is from the wheels, and the rear wheels specifically. Interesting, the efficiency changed for the components with the ground effects, particularly the front wing. Comparing the flow structure of the 901 in the foreground and the 881 will start to illustrate the fundamentally different way each diffuser works. Despite the numbers not being largely different, the 901 has a clearly better diffuser. Pausing it here, the 901 on the left is less messy than the 881 on the right. Closer look shows how separating the diffuser into 3 volumes controls the air better, rather than the large open section with the streams drawn all the way into the center. The bottom view illustrates this very well. Taking a pressure plot across the mouth of the diffuser as indicated by the red line shows how different the diffuser is making similar downforce numbers. The plot has a peak just inside the edge of the floor that is from the air accelerating around the rear wheel and into the open outer section of the diffuser. The ceiling tab in front of the rear wheels that the 901 and the McLarens had since the MP42B doesn't exist. The function of the outer sections of the 881 diffuser contains a large vortice that contribute a large amount to its effectiveness, where the 901 builds low pressure towards the center in a much more linear way. The corresponding pressure map on the Y and Z axes shows a peak inside the floor edge for the 881. Also for the 901, the high pressure field in front of the rear wheel is much more pronounced, illustrating why the rear wheels are producing more drag. The reason is how the diffuser is interacting with the wheel. Not sealing the diffuser means the large vortice is drawing down from this high pressure field. The pressure and wall stress maps from under the car shows how much the 881's outer section is working, indicated by the arrows. The flow lines are nice and laminar but with a large lateral velocity. The X movie will show the vorticity through this zone more clearer. Before this, both maps on the body show that the air is more controlled by the 901. The pressure in the diffuser suggests flow detachment for the 881. Which in itself isn't a problem as long as flow reattaches and is symmetrical. The idea is a bubble of turbulence can sit beyond the diffuser's entrance step with a laminar flow passing over. This bubble can also change sizes. It just needs the laminar flow to reattach after, sealing the bubble. This image of the line integral convolution, those flow lines which is a product of graphical output, make it apparent that the flow does reattach after turbulence. However, the line should be more symmetrical for a stable bubble. It is likely that it leaks. With the 1989 car that pushed this concept further, that bubble would have likely become even more unstable. You can also see the outer section vorticity lines which are clearly different from the 901. The pressure inside the diffuser of the 901 is lower and the wall shear stress values are higher, particularly after the exhaust suggests that air is pulling on the surface. The corresponding high pressure at the same region to the yellow says that air is actually slowing. Now the X movies. The first frame starts where the pressure plot was taken. For the 881 you can see the peak low pressure at the edge of the floor. Preceding this point, the vorticity forms in the outer section to a strong and stable structure. For the 901, the center section contains a strong and stable counter-rotating vortex structures. Wrapping this up, the only reason that Leyton House CG901 is of any note is because it sits at the beginning of the story of Adrian Newey in Formula 1. Its only partial success was at the French Grand Prix, where a clever strategy on a conducive flat track almost resulted in a surprise win. The other results were poor, mostly because of reliability. When it wasn't breaking down, it seemed to be an efficient car, not necessarily a fast car, never qualifying very well. However, the story of the different diffuser is worth understanding at a deeper level. The car that was expected to be competitive in 1989 never came, with the performance gain materializing partway through 1990. The art of the diffuser is a fundamental part of this competitive aero formula, which Formula 1 had become by 1990.